As the sun dipped below the horizon, the male lion turned back toward Ethan, his massive head gently nudging the man's chest in a silent act of gratitude. For a moment, time stood still. Then, with a final, powerful glance, the lions disappeared into the trees. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. Ethan Carter's truck bounced unevenly across the rugged trail as he sped toward his cabin, clutching the fragile lion cub in his arms. The rain had finally stopped, but the dampness clung to the air, a chilling reminder of the storm that had just passed. The cub, whose golden fur had once been the pride of its species, now lay motionless, its ribs jutting sharply against its skin. Each breath it took was shallow and labored, and the tremors running through its tiny body only added to the weight of Ethan's growing concern. He glanced down at the cub, its dark eyes half-lidded, the light from the truck's dashboard casting a pale glow over its features. The look in its eyes was one of deep sorrow, an unmistakable echo of suffering that could not be ignored. As Ethan drove, his mind raced. How had a lion ended up in such a remote, forgotten circus? Was it even legal? Was this some twisted scheme by people who saw animals as mere entertainment, their pain just a means to an end? His fingers gripped the steering wheel tighter, the knuckles turning white. The questions piled up in his mind, but there was no time for answers now. What mattered was saving this creature's life. Ethan had worked with countless wild animals in his years as a conservationist, but nothing had prepared him for this delicate creature, a symbol of raw power and grace, reduced to a broken shell. He could feel the weight of its suffering, the responsibility pressing heavily on his chest, as if the very air in the truck had thickened with the gravity of the moment. His cabin, small and unassuming, loomed ahead, nestled within a grove of dense trees. The porch light flickered to life as Ethan pulled in, casting a warm golden light against the encroaching dusk. As he stepped out of the truck, he cradled the cub closer, feeling the faint rhythm of its heartbeat against his chest. It wasn't much, but it was something. He had to get it inside quickly. He had to help. Ethan carried the cub into his home, carefully laying it on a large old quilt that had seen better days. The room was warm, with a fire crackling softly in the hearth, the only source of light other than the dim glow of the lamps. A few animal posters lined the walls, their colors faded but still carrying the promise of a life spent fighting for creatures like the one in front of him. As he worked to clean the cub's wounds, he could feel his own heart racing in rhythm with its labored breathing. The gashes on its flank, deep and jagged, seemed to stretch on forever, as if the cub had been subjected to a cruel fate that had no mercy. It was hard to believe this tiny lion had once roamed freely in the savannas, its mighty roar shaking the earth. Instead, it lay before him, vulnerable and weak. "You're safe now," he whispered to it, the words as much for his own reassurance as for the cub. "I won't let anyone hurt you again." His voice was steady, but the thoughts swirling inside his mind were far from calm. As he continued to treat the cub, he couldn't help but wonder. Who had done this to it? Who had chained it, starved it, and broken it down to this? The cub was clearly too young to be left in such conditions. Had it been abandoned, or worse? Was it part of some inhumane practice? Ethan's jaw clenched as anger bubbled up inside him. But he shoved the feelings aside for now. There was no room for anything but care. The fire's warmth seemed to seep into his bones as he cleaned the cub's wounds, his hands moving with practiced precision, but his mind still swirling with questions. The storm outside had passed, but it felt as though a different storm had settled deep within him. It wasn't just the need to help. It was something deeper. Ethan knew that this cub had been through something horrific, and saving it would mean more than just healing its body. He'd have to help it heal in ways he couldn't yet imagine. As the cub's shallow breathing slowed and steadied, a quiet sense of relief washed over him. But even as he sat back on his heels and wiped his brow, one thought kept repeating itself in his mind. This was just the beginning. Whatever the cub had been through, it had found its way to him, and Ethan wasn't the kind of man to turn away from a call like that. Outside, the trees swayed with the remnants of the storm, their branches creaking and moaning in the wind. Ethan sat in silence, the fire flickering in the hearth as he watched over the cub. This was a moment of fragile hope, a tiny flicker of life against a backdrop of darkness. It was the beginning of a journey, and he wasn't sure where it would lead. But one thing was certain: he would do everything in his power to see it through. Ethan sat back in the worn rocking chair on the porch of his cabin, the cool evening air whispering through the surrounding pines. He rubbed his hands together, trying to shake off the chill, though the weight of the day clung to him like a thick fog. His mind was heavy, burdened with thoughts of Leo, the lion cub that had somehow found its way into his life. It had been a week since he found the cub lying lifeless in the woods, but each passing day only seemed to raise more questions. The fire in the cabin flickered behind him, sending occasional sparks into the air as the last remnants of daylight faded, giving way to the ink-black sky. The questions gnawed at him. Where had Leo come from? What kind of monster had treated him this way? His fur, once vibrant, was now growing back in patches, and though his eyes had regained their strength, they still carried an eerie sadness. It was clear the cub had been through something far worse than mere neglect. Ethan had tried everything to track down the cub's origins, contacting local wildlife authorities, even a few shady animal brokers who occasionally turned a blind eye to illegal activities. But all his efforts had yielded nothing. Leo had simply appeared, as if pulled from the dark corners of the earth, and Ethan couldn't shake the nagging feeling that the truth about the cub was far more sinister than he had first imagined. As Ethan absent-mindedly traced the rim of his mug with his thumb, the distant sound of rustling leaves caught his attention. His breath caught in his throat. He froze, the hairs on his neck standing up. It wasn't the usual evening sounds of birds or small animals. This was different. This was deliberate. Something or someone was out there. His eyes darted to the tree line, where the dark silhouettes of the pines melded into shadows. The wind shifted, bringing a hint of something strange, a primal, almost electric charge in the air. And then, there it was, a low growl. Not from a dog, not from anything he could easily dismiss. This was a lion's growl, deep and resonant. Ethan stood up quickly, heart pounding. His legs felt heavy, the adrenaline racing through his veins. But he couldn't move. Not yet. He needed to see. He needed to understand. And then, as if materializing from the darkness, two figures emerged from the forest. Two lions, larger than any he had ever seen. The male, with a powerful frame, walked with regal precision, his mane thick and dark, swaying in the breeze like a crown of fire. His gaze was intense, unwavering, yet strangely calm. Beside him, the lioness stood with quiet grace, her golden eyes shining in the dim light. She was the epitome of strength and beauty, a creature born of the wild. The sight of them together, untamed, unstoppable, took Ethan's breath away. The two lions stood motionless, just beyond the tree line, watching him with what felt like an unsettling intelligence. Ethan's heart raced, his thoughts a jumble. Lions didn't roam these parts. They couldn't. They shouldn't. The male lion's eyes locked with his, unblinking, as if he were searching Ethan's very soul. Ethan's breath was shallow, and the weight of the situation pressed against his chest. What were they doing here? Why were they so close? It was then that he noticed something in the male lion's eyes, a subtle recognition, an understanding that felt almost personal. The lion didn't move. Neither did the lioness. They stood together, side by side, in the fading light, watching Ethan as if waiting for him to make the next move. His mind raced and panic began to set in. Was this a trap? Were these lions dangerous? He had heard stories of wild animals turning aggressive, especially when they felt cornered. But nothing about this situation felt typical. The lions didn't seem hostile, just watchful, waiting. Ethan's fingers tightened around the edge of his mug, and for a moment his thoughts spiraled. The cub, Leo, was inside the cabin. Was this why the lions had appeared? Had they come for him? Or had they come for the cub? The silence between the humans and the lions stretched long, and a cold shiver ran down his spine as the answer began to form in his mind. This wasn't random. This wasn't chance. These lions had come for Leo, and somehow they knew exactly where to find him. The realization struck Ethan like a bolt of lightning. It wasn't just the cub that had been brought here. The lions were connected to him in some unspoken way, a bond forged through something far beyond understanding. He slowly set the mug down on the porch railing, his heart hammering in his chest, his mind grappling with the impossible situation before him. He couldn't explain it, couldn't make sense of it. But one thing was clear. The lions were waiting for him to make a choice. The morning mist still clung to the land, a soft veil that barely parted as the sun began to rise, its first light spilling across the earth in golden tendrils. The air was damp, the earth beneath Ethan's boots wet with the remnants of the storm from the night before. The whole world seemed to hold its breath, quiet and still, as if the land itself was waiting for what was to come. Ethan stood on the porch, his gaze fixed on the two lions standing just beyond the tree line. The male lion was immense, his muscular form barely moving, yet exuding an aura of raw power. His mane, dark and thick, framed a face that was both regal and wild, eyes locked on Ethan with an unwavering intensity. His posture was calm, but Ethan could feel the strength in every sinew of his body. It was a force of nature, unchallenged, untamed. The female lion lingered in the background, her graceful, silent presence equally commanding. Her golden fur seemed to glow in the soft light, her eyes sharp and intelligent as she surveyed the landscape. Her body was poised, elegant, like a queen waiting for her command to move. Ethan stood motionless, unsure of what to do. He had known this moment would come, but now that it was here, he was paralyzed. The lions were wild, too wild for him to comprehend. His instinct told him to run, to retreat into the safety of his cabin and shut the door behind him. But as his eyes flicked toward Leo, the cub who had become more than a patient to him, he realized something deeper was at play. Leo, his golden eyes brighter than ever, padded toward the door. The cub had grown in the days since Ethan had found him, though the scars of his past remained etched on his frail body. But there was strength now, something undeniable, a spirit awakening within him. He walked to the threshold of the cabin, pausing before letting out a low, rasping roar. The sound was not one of fear or aggression, but a sound that seemed to echo with recognition. A call to something bigger, something that belonged to him. Ethan's heart clenched, a mix of awe and confusion settling into his chest. Without a second thought, Leo stepped outside. His movements were slow but purposeful, and the mist seemed to part for him, a sacred path he was meant to walk. Ethan, his breath caught in his throat, followed, unsure of what would happen next, but driven by an instinct stronger than fear. The male lion, still standing like a statue, did not charge. He did not growl. Instead, he lowered his massive head in a subtle, respectful gesture, the action almost too human in its grace. The female lion mirrored the movement, her eyes soft as she observed the cub, then the man. It was as though they were acknowledging something profound between them, a shared understanding of the bond that connected them all. Ethan watched, a sense of disbelief flooding his senses, as Leo padded up to the male lion. The cub nudged against the lion's side, the physical connection both tender and powerful. The male lion rumbled, a deep, resonating sound, full of warmth and recognition. It was a sound that felt ancient, like the earth itself was vibrating in harmony with it. Leo let out a soft mewl, a sound of comfort, of belonging. The cub was no longer an orphan, no longer alone in this wild, confusing world. He had found his pride, and the pride had found him. Ethan's heart beat in his throat as the impossible unfolded before him. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the scene. Leo, a lion cub he had saved from certain death, now standing before a lioness and a male lion who was clearly his kin. There was no anger, no fear, no violence in the air, only recognition. The male lion's gaze shifted toward Ethan then, a look of understanding passing between them. There was no threat in it, no hostility, only an unspoken respect. The lions weren't here to fight, to reclaim, or to terrorize. They were here to take Leo back to where he belonged, to the world he was meant for. Ethan swallowed hard, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He had never been more certain of anything in his life. This was right. This was where Leo was meant to be. The lions, powerful and majestic, had come for him. Not as predators, but as family, as protectors. And with that, Ethan knew. He stepped back, allowing the pride to reunite, to move forward as they were always meant to. The male lion gave one last look, his gaze unwavering but filled with a sense of gratitude, before he turned, guiding Leo toward the trees. The lioness followed, her presence silent but strong. Ethan remained on the porch, his body trembling from the emotional release. He couldn't explain it. He didn't need to. He had witnessed something no one else could ever understand. Some bonds were too deep, too ancient, for the human mind to grasp. But in his heart, Ethan knew one truth for certain. Leo had been saved. And in doing so, he had given Ethan a gift beyond measure. A glimpse into a world where healing, love, and belonging were more than just words. They were alive in the actions of a lion's pride. The moment hung in the air, suspended in time. Ethan stood frozen in the doorway, eyes locked on the two lions that had come from the shadows of the forest. They were no longer just animals, beasts of raw strength and untamed majesty. They were symbols, silent messengers of something deeper than Ethan had ever imagined. The male lion's gaze met Ethan's one last time before he turned with deliberate grace. The lioness followed, their movements synchronized, as though they were bound by something invisible but unbreakable. And then, as the dense forest whispered around them, Leo hesitated. The cub-turned lion turned back, eyes lingering on Ethan. His gaze was softer than it had ever been, free of the fear and hunger that had once consumed him. There was something more now, a deep recognition, a thankfulness, a bond, forged in shared trials, now complete. For a moment, the world held its breath. Ethan felt his heart swell, a mixture of pride, sadness, and awe. Leo was no longer the fragile, malnourished cub that had stumbled into his life. He was a lion now, a creature of the wild, of ancient power and belonging. But there was something more in his eyes, a connection that transcended the boundaries of species, of circumstance. It was a connection that could never be erased. But before Leo could take his final step, the male lion, the one who had been so still, so commanding, paused. He turned back toward Ethan. The silence that followed was thick, laden with the unspoken. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. The lion approached with slow, measured steps, a deliberate motion that seemed to carry the weight of everything that had passed between them. Then, in an act so simple, yet so profound, the lion nudged his massive head against Ethan's chest. The force of it was gentle, but the message was clear. It was gratitude, respect, a silent acknowledgement of the care and sacrifice Ethan had given, asking for nothing in return but the chance to give Leo his freedom. Ethan stood still, his hand instinctively reaching out to rest on the lion's broad head. His touch, tentative yet firm, conveyed everything words could not. This was no ordinary creature standing before him. This was a king, a guardian of the wild, and he was sharing this moment of unspoken understanding. The male lion stepped back after the gesture, his eyes still fixed on Ethan. The lioness, as graceful as ever, followed him. Together they turned toward the wilderness, their forms melting into the shadowed trees, the sounds of their footsteps swallowed by the thick underbrush. And just like that, they were gone. Ethan remained at the doorway, staring into the distance, his thoughts swirling like the mist that clung to the forest floor. He didn't move, didn't speak. There was no need to. The world had changed in that fleeting moment, and he could feel the weight of it settling deep within him. The act of kindness he had extended to Leo had come full circle, the wild returning what it had once taken. As the trees swallowed the lion's whole, Ethan closed his eyes, a deep sense of peace filling his chest. He had done his part, and now it was time to let Leo walk his path. The wild had called him home. And in that quiet stillness, Ethan understood. Nature's gratitude was not always loud, nor did it always come in the form one expected. Sometimes, it was simply a gentle nudge, a silent acknowledgement of the bond that can form between man and beast. It was enough, more than enough.